Checking 1, 2, 3. Checking 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2. 2, 2, 3. 3, 2. Check 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Hey, hey. Check, check. Check, check.
Thank you. I guess I must have passed a certain kind of threshold here, because I think that every other focused conversation I've given, they've given some kind of introduction at the beginning. But now I've been here 4.5 years and I don't need any more introductions. Everybody has a sense of who I am. So thank you. Thank you for coming to this presentation. What I'm going to share with you today is the first iteration of something called an academic plan. And I'm going to use it as the occasion to talk a little more broadly about academic planning more generally. So if along the way you have questions or you want me to stop and pause and respond to something or address something more fully, let me know. I will tell you, I cannot see those of you in the back of this room because of the light behind you and the snow. So I see vague outlines of people, so I may have to resort to just pointing if I see a hand in the air. So as you know, developing an academic plan, multi-year integrative academic plan, was identified as one of the institutional initiatives for 2017-18. Along with, this is the short list, and then there's a broader list too, but along with a couple of other priorities, student-centered general education curriculum, experiential education, recovering our leadership, that focus in no large part or almost exclusively on the academic program. And that was a shift from the institutional initiatives of the past few years, which actually have not focused on the academic program. And so we were actually hearing that from members of the community, that a lot of important ideas or issues were being addressed in the institution's annual initiatives, but there was nothing about the academic program. And so this year, there was a corrective step to really put it front and center. And when December rolled around, and it wasn't that I wasn't thinking about it or thinking about the components or engaging people in conversation, and there was nothing written down on paper, I drafted what you see at your tables and what I will share with you and what I distributed to the faculty yesterday, I guess, really as a way of sparking more conversation. This is the first iteration, and for me, the first and possibly the second iteration, maybe even the third, are always spaces where there's lots of oxygen in the room. So it's really about an invitation to engage and reflect on what is on the page that can help us move forward. It's also true that what is on the page reflects the perspective of someone who is located at various institutional crossroads and part of many different kinds of conversations. So I certainly tried to bring those to bear in the draft that I've been working on. So I will share with you some parts of this plan today, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for you to talk at your tables and give me some feedback for the next iteration, which I hope to draft by May, and then leave it posted somewhere for members of the community to see and reflect on over the summer, and then provide feedback and perhaps have a third iteration in the fall. And we'll just have to assess where we are at that point, if we're close to having what we think makes sense or not. So I thought I'd start with this question. So why develop an academic plan at all? When we have Augsburg 2019, we have our annual initiatives to define and focus our institutional priorities. And so I think that the short answer to that question for me is that Augsburg 2019 provides a really powerful invitational framework, but it doesn't answer all of the questions before us when it comes to the academic program. And so we need something, I would argue, a little more specific and focused. We need something that helps us, in the face of so many things that matter to us, to begin to identify and focus our attention on the 2, 3, maybe 4 things that we think, by paying attention to, we can make the biggest difference for the academic program and for Augsburg more generally within the next 5 to 7 years or so. You'll see I say Augsburg 2025 on this because I figured it might take a while to actually consolidate the plan, and also because I like numbers that make a certain kind of sense, and 2025 sounded good to me. So I'm not wedded to 2025 at all, that is to say. It was just a placeholder. So, and then there's always this kind of idea that if you don't have a plan, you'll end up somewhere else. And in my experience, if you have a plan, you're going to end up somewhere else also. But at least you'll be exerting a kind of gravitational pull on people's attention and dispersed energies, rightly dispersed in many ways, but powerfully brought together when there is something that brings us together and we're all working on from our various institutional locations. So I think that having an academic plan is actually something fairly new to me. I'm actually been asked by faculty, various faculty over the last 3 years, not every faculty, of course, but some of them, like, when are we going to have an academic plan? And I've been, well, an academic plan, we have Augsburg 2019. Do we need something more than that? And so it's taken me a while to see what such a plan might be. But I think that in this environment especially, and we've all heard about the challenging environment of higher ed, that having some kind of strategic focus to the academic program makes sense and will position us well. So one context for my thinking about, well, what should an academic plan be, is that it should align in some way, or at least be congruent with our institutional mission. So I start even by framing the document that you see at your tables with a reminder of what that mission is. And I know, because the faculty engaged questions of mission and identity at the January faculty meeting, that for some people, this is a very powerful statement and gets at something remarkably aspirational and difficult to achieve when you really begin to unpack it. Whereas for others, it seems kind of vague and abstract. So, you know, people are in different kinds of positions relative to the mission. Like, what does it really mean to create all of these things? And what kind of, I don't know, almost emotional connection do we have to a statement like this? Well, it is pretty abstract, and a lot of you probably worked on developing it. And it does provide a meaningful framework for this community in so many ways. So Augsburg 2019 is another framework for me. I think about the institutional mission. I think about what we've been trying to accomplish with Augsburg 2019 and how an academic plan would grow out of, help realize the aspirations identified in Augsburg 2019 in a more focused and specific way. So Augsburg 2019 names some things that probably we will carry forward. You know, it names investing in faculty, in experiential education, in curricular innovation, and in our core commitments. And it's actually hard for me to imagine that any of those things will kind of drop out of sight altogether because they're so central and core to Augsburg. There's also, as Marty and others know, and Marty was the one who introduced me, in fact, to this document, a conversation going on in Lutheran higher education in this country at this moment. So it's sort of an interesting convergence. Like, what should Lutheran higher ed be in the 21st century? Are there distinguishing characteristics of Lutheran colleges and the ELCA colleges in particular? So this document, actually I've used the graphic for the previous iteration of the document, as some of you know, but it's been revised and will probably be put out in a format that looks like this too. So I've thought about that, like, what does Lutheran higher ed look like? What values anchor it? And one of the metaphors that is so powerful for that resonates with Augsburg for me, rooted and open, deeply rooted in that tradition, but that tradition opens us up to this remarkable kind of inclusiveness and commitment to inclusiveness. Okay, the innovation imperative, and I know you won't be able to read this, but this is a document that I circulated to a number of people over the summer and in the fall that talks about the innovation imperative for small colleges in particular. So the author, who is a president of Dominican University in California, basically argues that small colleges have had to adapt and change in very profound ways, not in short-term tactical ways, but in deep strategic ways that change how we do what we do. And for most of us, that does require some kind of change. For a few, mostly prestigious liberal arts colleges, they have the resources to buffet themselves against the forces external to them that are changing student behavior and making the higher education model difficult to sustain in an economic sense. There are some colleges that have some kind of distinction about them that resonates in the market, and so they're able to capitalize on that distinction and that distinctiveness. Many colleges have adopted the kind of combination of liberal arts with some select professional studies or graduate programs in order to appeal to a broader group of students. And some have been willing, or by mission aligned with, moves that make them arguably more market-driven than educationally driven. So I've actually kind of showed this to a number of people. The responses tend to be remarkably congruent. People tend to see, Augsburg in some combination of New American College and potential for distinction, or seen some distinction in this already. I think that's probably fair if you're going to use those paradigms. So the sort of academic vision that I propose in the document is this one, which is kind of a version of what we've seen in some of our other documents. But this idea of preparing students not merely to adapt to the world, but actually to change the world. What I was drawn to in that phrase was the kind of resonance of a deep commitment to social justice that I think motivates so many people here at Augsburg, keeping in mind the list of distinctions that seem to pop up regardless of the context of the conversation here. For me, intentional diversity and inclusion, powerful differentiator for Augsburg in our regional environment now. So many of the faculty I talk to who are applying for jobs here, or administrators too, cite that as the reason that they became interested in Augsburg and being a part of the kind of work that we're doing. You know, student-centered. In the futures work, we've kind of settled on this idea of, well, what does it mean to be radically student-centered? We spent a lot of time on that word radical. Like, what does putting radical in front of that phrase mean? What does that hold us to? Experiential learning. Elaine in the Sabo Center, a lot of people across campus working on that, because we know that that is a powerful indicator of student learning. If it's experiential, it's deeper, it stays with people, it's more transformative. And then, of course, vocational discernment, a key part of our mission at Augsburg, our commitment to social justice, also rooted in our Lutheran heritage. And this idea that we talk about, but is becoming more and more sort of a focus in my own mind, is this sense of the public mission of Augsburg, which kind of teases me conceptually. It's different for me from what I've known in my previous jobs. And I find it remarkably powerful, and it's emerging as part of the national conversation now for organizations like the American Association of Colleges and Universities, sort of recapturing the purpose of higher ed, its public mission as opposed to a private good. Right, so really important. And this sense of commitment to place. So we have a lot of interesting ideas popping up, perking up around Augsburg's location in Cedar Riverside. Well, Augsburg's in a lot of different places, and we have this kind of deep connection to those places in most of the places where we are, with room to grow, arguably, in places like Rochester for how we realize that. Yeah, Audrey?
I just think that it's interesting to think about a private institution claiming public spaces and for the good of the public.
Yeah.
Having a spouse that works at the University of Minnesota, one of his largest disappointments, and he's not alone, is that they don't care. That is really, I mean, he's been there forever. They don't preface serving the public.
Mm-hmm.
They would like to be an elite institution, and that,
Right.
and it's very, average family income is about $100,000 for the students that go there.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's a very interesting stamp for us.
Yeah.
It has a lot of energy and purpose.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And kind of vivid for us, too, that we're so close to the institution you referenced, just across the street. As you say, a public institution, but in Minnesota, as in many states, I think the big flagship public institution is becoming one of the more elite schools in that region and community. Yeah. But as measured by competitiveness of enrollments, like for undergraduate students and graduate both, I think that's fair. So another context for me, and I reference this at the beginning of the document too, is this idea of becoming Augsburg University and some of the components of that, or at least things that are happening at the same time. So the name change, which for me really was a description of what we already are, and yet also an invitation to think about who we're going to be in the future. So it sort of has that doubleness. Yes, we already were a small university and all of our complexity, and yet now that we're calling ourselves Augsburg University, what will that mean for us? The Hagfors Center, which when I sort of began thinking about this, was still fairly abstract in my mind as something that could be potentially transformative for Augsburg. And now, after having visited again the third floor of Memorial Hall, and then gone over to the Hagfors Center, I'm like, this kind of messes with your mind somehow, right? Right? To locate, to kind of move from the kind of space we've inhabited and thought this is what it is to be Augsburg into, you know, half of our faculty, not all I know, but the ones who are not officed in the building still have the opportunity to teach in it. And I've heard from so many of them too how grateful and appreciative they are that they have that opportunity. And then of course it's a resource for all of us. So fabulous coffee place and great place to meet up with people in an unexpected way, which was part of the vision. You know, Gen Ed redesign is that kind of process that kind of fosters and promotes this deep kind of inquiry into who we are and who we want to be. Lutheran higher ed for the 21st century is a similar kind of catalyst, as is that topic we were just on, the public mission of the institution. And then at the end of the day, I would say I see it and the academic plan as connected to the other planning work we're doing and to the other kinds of factors that are shaping who we are. So mission and identity, Augsburg 2019, the annual initiatives, futures work, sense of emerging strengths, and assessment of our external realities, leading into the academic plan, which leads into a new sort of collaborative process as we work towards a new strategic plan. Right? So these things are all interconnected. They're not just separate from one another. And one of the ideas we're playing around with, at least, And we've actually realized, in terms of creating this revenue growth team is what we call ourselves, the provost, the VP of enrollment, and the CFO. But what we're working toward is a more integrated planning framework that looks at enrollment strategic plan, academic strategic plan, and financial strategic plan, and how they're all interconnected and need to be in order to leverage the strengths of the institution. So among the kinds of questions we might ask ourselves at this juncture are, well, where are we now? And if we don't make any changes, where are we likely to be 5 to 10 years from now? Where do we want to be? And what do we think would make us distinctive and competitive in the future? What evidence is there to support that belief? And then how can we get there? Among all the things that matter to us, what must we prioritize if we are to build strength in the academic program? What new capacities must we develop? So I took those kinds of questions and I tried to bring them together. And then I launched on this idea, which is not my idea. You can Google it. You'll find all kinds of people who have said this thing. But I love this thing because it resonates with me in such a true way, even from the days when I was a faculty member, writing articles and chapters and such. There's this way you can approach a topic in a really simplistic way, and then, of course, working with students, too. When you're in the midst of complexity, and then on the other side, an elegant simplicity that makes you ask yourself sometimes, was this really worth writing at all? It seems all so self-evident now, right? So as I used to tell my students, the hardest work on your writing covers the traces of its own production, and it looks seamless. So what I'm aspiring to is something like that with an academic plan. I don't think it's there yet, by the way, and I'm probably, well, I might be the biggest critic of it right now. But what I was trying to do as I thought through the issues was to reach simplicity on the other side of complexity as an aspirational goal. So that led me to think there should be a manageable number of high priority objectives. So what is a manageable number? Well, in this first draft you'll see 3, but maybe it's 2, or maybe it's 4, maybe it's up to 5, but I would be really nervous if we get beyond that, because I don't even know that we'd be able to remember them, right? So part of the idea here is coming up with something that people can actually remember. Succinct statements on why they matter, so that we make that visible to people, and people have a chance to weigh in on it too and help craft those things. A few key initiatives for each objective, together with tactics for reaching the desired outcomes. Those can kind of cycle in and out. Those are the smaller turning wheels, I guess. And then trying to build into the draft of the plan itself at least some idea about how we would measure progress and know it when it occurs. So I guess what I'm trying to suggest with all of this is that there's a kind of model, and I'm not somebody who's schooled in planning. So I see my colleague Leif Anderson in the back of the room. I know that he goes to all these conferences on planning. I'm not a student of planning, but I have had some experience planning along the way that suggests to me that when you have these kinds of features, like a manageable number that people can remember, and a sense of why they matter, and a sense of how you'll know progress when you see it, people can tap in from their various locations. And you haven't been too prescriptive, but you've also given it some definition and created a kind of, one of my favorite metaphors, gravitational pull on a community that when I first arrived, I was fond of calling radically autonomous, which is a strength, I see. It can be a frustration if you're the provost, but it's a strength for the community. So I put a couple of copies of this plan, and I'm not going to suggest that we all read it here. I've distributed it to faculty. It will be posted online. There will be places to look at it as we move forward. But I just wanted to share with you sort of what it looks like and the draft that is marked on every page. So this is the January, in fact, 2018 version, page 1. So what does it do? What are these 3 things? And are they are they simplistic or are they elegant simplicity? I think that's the teasing question for me and will continue to be. So the first one, strengthen student-centered teaching and learning for an intentionally diverse community, highlights and holds up our distinction in diversity, inclusion, and after the Batalden lecture, maybe that was last week, I'm wanting to call intercultural humility instead of intercultural competence, because it actually suggests even more richness to me. It calls for this kind of inclusiveness, living into it more deeply in the faculty, the staff, as well as the academic program itself. It envisions a way of strengthening teaching and learning through partnerships not only on campus, but off campus as well. The second, program quality and innovation, is morphing a little bit in the dialogue I've already had with people into program quality and innovation in response to the world around us. I'm not quite sure of that language yet, but capturing somehow the sense that it's not just innovation necessarily for the sake of innovation, but innovation that links with our mission and our sense of calling as an institution. So here I called out signature programs that respond to the world's needs and the public good. And I understand, although I wasn't at the meeting, that at the chairs and program directors meeting, there were at least some people there who wondered about this idea of signature program and what that might entail, and have reflected on it a bit since that meeting as well. Getting better at how we measure and discern the health of programs. We could kind of focus on academic programs here, but maybe it's programs more generally too. Which ones are doing what we think or intended them to do? Which ones are struggling? What might we do in order to rethink, possibly retire those kinds of programs? And how do we do that in a way that respects our commitments to the community? Paying more attention to how we think about our undergraduate program for working adults. I'm resisting using our common language for that. But what does this moment enable us to see about what that program might be that isn't perhaps as rooted in our legacy programs? I think that's been, you know, it's a strength and it's a weakness for us that our adult undergraduate program is a legacy program in the way that it is. Many legacy programs are struggling now, and the ones that are capturing market share are the ones that can be invented in this moment in a different kind of budget and business and program model. And then Rochester and innovation kind of fall into that category as well. And then finally, last but not least by any means, is improving academic structures, leadership, and administrative support for faculty work. So there's a gamut of different kinds of goals that one might put here. This links most directly to me to the questions about, you know, academic structure that we were talking about last year and becoming Augsburg University, with the idea that the reasons that should drive any structural change is the kind of support that that structural change could provide for the academic program. And I don't know that everyone, I don't know, maybe I just have an outsized ambition for what that might be, but I also have lived in a different institutional culture where there was an administrative structure that provided more support for faculty work than I think we have here. And it doesn't have to be like the one I've known, but something that provides more support for faculty work. So all of this leads me to think this is a pretty meat and potatoes kind of academic plan. So that's going to be my provocation. I was really pleased when I had something on paper because I was anxious about not having something on paper. But I'm like, okay, well, these things resonate with Augsburg 2019. You can see that they are connected and grow out of it. Should we be attempting more in an academic plan would be one of the questions that I would ask us to consider. So one of my lessons from the Hagfors Center, as I reflected back and listened to those who had been involved in it for a long period of time, is that it can be a mistake to have an idea that's too small, right? It didn't really gather the energy and attention that we needed when the project was just to renovate or build a wing on the science building. It was when the people working on the vision for science, in conjunction with the rest of the community, realized that there were some things that were profoundly shared across disciplines, and maybe we could combine science, business, and religion, that we had an idea that was big. Of course, that was 2007, and the market crashed, and so that was a hiccup and a bump, but it eventually led to us being able to garner the kind of support for moving ahead with the building that we needed, even though it cost, what, like 3 times as much as the original plan? Something like that. Significantly more, right? So these are just a few of the pictures that kind of capture for me the vision as we worked with the architects and what they were trying to do in the different features of the building, not all of which are going to be legible to people who don't know it. But there's all this connectedness of this big idea, and what this institution is expressed in it in some pretty powerful ways. From the diagonal line that echoes the line for Riverside Avenue, to the colors that pick up some of the colors on campus, but also in the neighborhood. And there's more pictures like this too, of like little houses on fjords in Norway and things like that, where it's like, gosh, even the Norwegian stuff is woven into the design of the building. So this idea, which I think, Leif, you can correct me, was attributed to Tom Osland, our kind of landscape person who was working with us on the siting and the long-term vision for the campus, had this, or voiced this idea at some point, and it's one of the ideas that really sticks with me. And so I kind of use it now to think about, well, you know, where do you find that sweet spot of ambition that's realizable? You don't want to have an idea that's too big either, right? That is just impossible. So here's where you all come in today, maybe for the next 10 minutes or so. One of the things, this links to the previous slide about the big idea and how big ideas are born and the kind of culture of innovation that supports it. Also links to this idea of what we might need is innovation in the academic program beyond what we have seen to date. And so I found this definition online. I don't know, maybe there's better definitions somewhere, but this seemed kind of interesting to me, that the features of an innovative culture include at least diversity of people, proficiencies, and ideas, strong intrinsic motivation rather than motivation by external rewards, a high degree of autonomy, and freedom from excessive evaluation. So I thought you might talk at your tables, and I know there's a bunch of people kind of across the back ledge, but there's a few seats left, and maybe there could be a cluster somewhere. Just talk for a few minutes, and then there's index cards that I hope you can capture some of your thoughts on as well. And to take both of these questions, so to what degree do you think these conditions apply here at Augsburg? And 2, given how you respond at your table to question 1, what immediate steps do you think we could take to cultivate or strengthen a culture of academic innovation at Augsburg? So Do your best to stick to those topics. If you go off topic a little bit, it's fine, of course. You have the freedom to explore what is meaningful to the people at your table around those questions. And I will call you back in about 10 minutes. I want to encourage card writing so that I come away with something. It won't obligate you to be the speaker. Next minute or two. Okay, if I could get you to finish up the thought that you are currently articulating. I also want to invite those of you who might be looking at this through video conferencing to send me an email if you have anything to share. This is the Jay Peterson method for getting people's attention. So thank you. So I would love to hear any thoughts that came up at table around that first question and this kind of description or self-assessment of Augsburg, maybe limited to the academic culture, but maybe broader as well, whatever you guys talked about. Is there a table willing to leap into the silence?
We wanted to see more diversity of disciplines. Disciplinary diversity, we're small enough to really enact it. We want to be small to ourselves. Because we can have conversations across disciplines that we can have now until we get as large as our husband's school. So that's what we want. And we want diverse conversations with staff. We feel the staff are underutilized in our classes and in our conversations.
Anything else from your table to share?
We have two people who are in the PA program here, and so there's a lens was drawn onto professional programs, and pointed out that the professional programs aren't even mentioned until page 3 of this document, and that sort of implies that the beginning part of it is more about undergraduates. So we spent most of our time on the diversity question and the fact that we have a really, really diverse undergraduate population. What are we doing, or is it even a goal of ours, to funnel some of those undergraduates into the professional programs, which are not as diverse?
Yeah. Good. So I hope you guys are writing on the cards.
Oh, well, you get to read my writing.
Okay. Okay, well, let's just work around then and come back to the table in the corner.
Well, we had a good conversation about autonomy. We're kind of focused on C, and that is a spirit of innovation economy. And Marilee could share all these examples about Rick Tony in Wheaton College and Marchik building the MBA and so on and so on. We realized that this autonomy runs into an operational reality that there isn't actually a structure that gives you that autonomy. You have to kind of build a platform on which to get anything done, and then it's hard to keep it going. And I was just thinking about, my hero this year is Chris Holper, putting together this fantastic, innovative idea, and the struggle, which I understand all the elements of it. To put that together would suggest, well, is there appropriate autonomy there? I mean, I think he feels completely empowered about this idea, But to actually get it done, are we structured in a way that that works?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great comment.
I was
Next
told,
table?
well, I was told when I came here that you could build anything you wanted if you just were willing to pull the sack along and do it yourself. So to your point, you know. But we also talked about autonomy, and I put forth maybe the idea of like that to acknowledge that we have an interdependence, and that led to our discussion. That leads to our discussion about. I don't know how to summarize it now because I was generating all those ideas. About okay, so let me give an example. I'm part of the major, elementary ed. We're our own major. And we're now like officially part of the professional school, right? And what I'm afraid of is when we revise our curriculum, we would want our students to take African American history because they should know African American history to teach in urban schools, right? So what will there be negative consequences? I hope there wouldn't be for us sending the EED students over to Afro, right? I know that institutions, when they're driven by the financial bottom line, that if I export my students, my bottom line goes down. My seats aren't filled in my major. And if you're not seeing enough students in my major, then we're in peril. You know, I mean, that's, you know, the little red hen thing, right? And so how can we, as we grow, make sure that we are allowed to continue to be interdependent as a whole institution, and that we don't pit programs and majors and schools against each other to vie for the seat, for the dollar. I think that would be really destructive to our future.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Next table.
We did some version of rock, paper, scissors, and I lost. I turned around and there were 3 people going like this. I think the one that we commented on right away was in terms of the current culture here of the strong intrinsic motivation, rather than about motivation by external rewards. And I think that's a hallmark of this place. I think I would dovetail on Lay's comment about having platforms, you know, structures that allow for innovation. But I think the final piece of that we comment a lot on is how we are together then. High-performing teams are built upon trust. They're built upon intercultural competence, the capacity to navigate layers of cultural difference and people showing up in our full selves into those spaces. And that doesn't just happen when you bring a bunch of diverse elements into a room. It's the heavy lifting of being together, and we have points of tension and pockets that are, you know, around campus in different ways, like every group of 500 people on the planet, where those, you know, kind of freeing up those areas so we can be together. Those areas, you know, the better we are together, the more innovative we are, you know, and I think that's sort of part of the conversation. We all feel like there's a lot of aspirational things up there that we're all kind of dancing around. What did I miss?
Okay, thank you. Window people.
We talked about a whole bunch of stuff. So let me tell you what I was thinking about.
There you go.
Like the freedom from excessive evaluation. I had a similar reaction to the first table about this is a very undergraduate-centric document in its language. Maybe not in intent, but the way it reads. It's hard for grad directors to see themselves in this right now. If we have a strong point, strong part of our institution's future, we probably need to think about how we process and talk about that. The other part, though, is we had quite a bit of conversation here around the cultivating a culture of innovation and what that means. And it's hard. There's been some conversation here already about you can stick your neck out and be innovative, but as a structure there to help sort of move there. Lots of good ideas, but good ideas are kind of the easy part. So how do we reinforce innovation? What does that mean for us?
Like having a digital scholarship lab where faculty can come and try new technology and students can try new technology. Because if they don't have access to it, they can't envision how they're going to use it to be innovative.
And like building teams, like Jim said, where diverse edges can be not used as bones of contention and division, but which can be integrated in ways that foster innovation, which I think has to do with leadership and authority and where it holds it.
Yeah, thank you. Corner table.
We talked about a lot of those same ideas in terms of, we especially focused on the freedom from excessive evaluation because I believe a lot of our evaluation constraints are from outside external sources. So we have to abide by them. But we also talked about the high degree of autonomy, I think. Anything else you want to
I think also, right, the questions are answered through each person's perspective, right? So if you have accreditation and, right, those external pressures, or if you're rudderless, free physics. You see things differently, right? It's really different.
I'll just say, as a grant writer, I sort of take umbrage with how we phrase D here. I think it's sort of excessive evaluation, defining it as a constraint that isn't healthy. So creating a culture where we sort of allow for healthy evaluation as a way of sort of slowly building toward how we go.
Thank you. And
we talked a lot about D as well, about the different kinds of evaluation that happen that slow down innovation, maybe not formal like an accreditation process or that kind of thing, but within the organization. Fear of a new idea undermining an existing asset, or fear that once something's created it can't be spun down, so we should be really careful about what we try. Those kinds of concerns that can limit innovation. And so is there a possibility to create, whether it's physically separate or not, but some kind of a group that has some freedom from that critique and from that evaluation to try new things?
And I would add on to that of being really cognizant of when we have excessively complicated steps to be innovative. Like, which is, if you were to say to somebody, I have this idea for a class, how do I do that? It would take someone a long time to explain how you would get that from here to here, and you have to take it here, and then they have to approve it, and then you have to take it here, and you have to write this, and this, and this, and this, and then maybe. So I would say within the context of how is it being evaluated, that we don't make it so complicated to get something done that people don't even start.
well, thank you all for these really enriching suggestions, and I really hope that you will write them down for me, or send me an email in the days ahead if you think about more things as this proceeds. You know, as I said at the beginning, my hope is to produce another draft by the end of the year and have it open for feedback and commentary. We'll see. I mean, maybe that'll be the right timing, maybe it won't. But you've given me a lot to think about and to work on incorporating. So thank you. Thank you all. I will take the cards. Thank you. Thank you. And you're free to take the copies of this that are here, too. Index